Hi, this is Math 1115 remote delivery for April 29th, 2020. And the content lecture covers the square root property and the quadratic formula. When you run across this symbol or anytime you want to use it, you know what to do and you will decide. I like to open with something that I find encouraging. The fellow who wrote The Lord of the Rings included the words in his novel The Hobbit. So come snow after fire, and even dragons have their endings. You see, one day, these days of the era of COVID-19 will be a memory for us. We can make this a legacy of accomplishment. Our shared opportunity is to strive, to teach and learn, to earn our grades, and continue our educational pursuits unabated, in spite of the challenges. Finish strong. That is what champions do. The first topic is the square root property, which tells us that if we have an equation that looks like x squared is equal to k, then all we need to do is take the square roots of both sides, but we have to remember that x then is equal to plus or minus the square root of k. Remember, this symbol by itself is always bigger than or equal to 0. So if something squared is equal to k, then that something is equal to plus or minus the square root of k. Let's look at an example of this, or three examples, I guess. If we have x squared equals 16, that means x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 16, which is plus or minus 4. So these are the two answers. If we have 3y squared minus 4 equals 6, we put this into the form of the square root property. That is, we add 4 to both sides, and then we divide by 3. That means we have y squared is equal to 10 over 3. So something squared is equal to a number. So y is equal to plus or minus the square root of 10 over 3. So there are two solutions, this one and this one. The next example says, suppose I have x minus 2 whole squared is equal to 5. Well, this is something squared is equal to 5. So the something is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. We add 2 to both sides, and we find that x is equal to 2 plus the square root of 5, and x is equal to 2 minus the square root of 5, and sometimes we write that as 2 plus or minus the square root of 5. Now, here are some truths. All quadratic equations cannot be factored, and all quadratic equations are not in the form for the square root property to be used. This is the unamused face. But all quadratic equations can be converted into the form for the square root property to be used by a magic spell called completing the square. And you do not need to learn the magic. The Beatles were wrong. Love is not all you need. The quadratic formula is all you need. I will do the trick once for you, though. First of all, to do the quadratic formula, we have to put it into this form. So it is ax squared plus bx plus c. The reason we do that is we have to know what a, b, and c are. Now, if we divide all the way through by a, and subtract this from both sides, we have this. Then what we're going to do is complete the square. That means we're going to add b squared over 4a squared to both sides. But then this can be factored as x plus b over 2a whole squared is equal to, and this can be simplified when you get a common denominator into b squared minus 4ac. Then we divide, and we have 4, and the common denominator is 4a squared. Okay, so then we take the square root of both sides. You see that is the square root property, and we get this. Note that the plus or minus sign is here. And then we subtract b over 2a from both sides, and we get the quadratic formula. So x is equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It's important that you remember that this means there are two solutions, with a plus sign in the middle and a minus sign in the middle. Also remember that you have to divide the whole thing by 2a. It's a common mistake for people not to do that. All right, so here's a quadratic formula to solve. We have this, and it's in the right form, so we say a is 1, b is minus 5, and c is 6. So we can plug it in to the quadratic formula. Notice we have to do the calculations correctly. We get that it is 5 plus or minus the square root of, this is going to be 1 when you simplify it over 2. So if you add, you get 3. If you subtract, you get 2. Here's another problem, again in the right form. A is 2, b is minus 7. Notice the sign comes with it. And c is minus 5. Notice the sign comes with it. So now we will plug it into the quadratic formula. This is the square root of 89, and so the exact answer is going to have the square root of 89 in it. So one answer is 7 plus the square root of 89 over 4, and it's 7 minus the square root of 89 over 4. If I'm letting you use a calculator, you could change it into approximations like that, but these are the exact roots. Here's another quadratic formula here. A is 9, B is 24, and C is 16. I plug it in and do the calculation. This time this B is 576 minus 576. So you see you get a double root. It's plus or minus 0, so both roots are the same. And it's called a double root. It's minus 4 over 3. Here's another example. In this one, A is 3, B is minus 5, and C is 4. We do the calculation and we get the square root of minus 23. This is not a real number, and what we're going to say right now is that this has imaginary roots because b squared minus 4ac is less than 0. Here today in this class we just call this a not real answer. But that expression b squared minus 4ac really determines what's happening, and this is called the discriminant. So if b squared minus 4ac is positive and a perfect square, the roots are real, rational, and unequal. There are two different roots. If b squared minus 4ac is positive but not a perfect square, the roots are real, irrational, and not equal. If b squared minus 4ac equals 0, the roots are real, rational, and equal. That means it's a double root. And if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, there are no real roots. Now, the quadratic formula can be used in equations such as this. If you wanted to know the time it takes for something to hit the ground, you would be using this equation. You could subtract the s from both sides and multiply all the way through by 2, and you get this quadratic. And then you could use the quadratic formula. You see the a is g, the b is minus 2v0, and the c is 2s0 minus s. You plug all that stuff in and you can get an expression that the time is going to be this in terms of those other variables. We also can use this to solve word problems. Here you have a area that is 17 meters long and 12 wide, and we're using it for a patio with a rectangular pool. One end and one side of the patio around the pool are to be the same width. The other end with the diving board is to be twice the width, and the other side is to be 3 times the width as the narrow side. The total pool area is to be this. What are the widths of the patio ends and sides and the dimensions of the pool? Well, you let x be this dimension, and that also is this dimension. This is the place that is 2x, and this is the place that is 3x. So you see the length of the pool, which is 17 minus 3x times the pool width, which is going to be 12, the total width, minus 4x is equal to 96.5. You can multiply this out and simplify, put it in the right form. You have 12x squared minus 104x plus 107. So A is 12, B is minus 104, and C is 107.5. We can solve this and we find out that this is the answer, the exact answer, and we can plug in that into a calculator to get approximate, and so you have the widths of the areas as well as the While you have the widths there, you have the design parameters there. Why don't we do a little bit of practice? Here you want to solve these two using the square root property and use the quadratic formula for this. You know what to do and when to do it. Let's see how you did. So for number 10, you should have gotten minus 2 plus or minus the square root of 10. You can leave the answer that way if I ask for an exact answer. For number 12, use the square root property. We should have put a plus or minus here. That is a typo. But that is plus or minus 10. And then you solve, and you get, these are the two answers. And this is the answer you get using the quadratic formula. Again, we got 3 exact answers. Now, more than ever, time is precious. Each day must count. Do the math. It will make you strong. And now, more than ever, take care of yourself and of each other. See you.